Hey everybody, it's Pastor Dylan and welcome to the Dayspring Wesleyan Church podcast. At the end of this episode, please take the time to download our church app. It's the best way to stay connected to the life of the church. All you have to do is go to the App Store, search for Church Center, download and enter the information for our church. You will then be connected to our church community. I hope the following presentation inspires you to move closer to God in this journey we call faith. Enjoy.
I wanted to bring this stuff up here as an illustration today because I feel like so many of us are carrying a lot of baggage in our lives. And I'm hoping that by the end of the service that we'll be able to give a lot of it over to God. There's so many circumstances and things that we've come in contact with that have just sort of weighed us down. And I have to tell you, after first service, I actually think I tweaked my back on lifting that thing. So if every once in a while I walk around and I'm like, it's because my back's out or something. So I am now physically feeling what it's like to carry a lot of baggage, I guess. But what I understand is that probably a lot of us carry just a lot of baggage with us and generally that weigh us down. So I love traveling. I don't know about you, but I do love the experience of it. I love visiting new places and seeing new things. I do hate the process, though, of packing and unpacking the luggage. And then having to carry that stuff around to the airports and all that is just mind-numbing, you know. And early on, I tend to be one that would overpack. Okay, it was just like anything and everything I would think of, I would just overpack. But I learned over time, through the help of my wife and an intervention, which sounds weird, by the way. I think I'm the woman in our relationship, but she packs a lot lighter than I do, which is weird. So she taught me how to do that. But there's several trips that I've taken just personally, either missions trips. There's several trips that I've taken with students. As a youth pastor for 20 years here, we did a lot of that. We did a lot of missions trips, youth camps, conventions, and I was always blown away by the amount of stuff that some of the girls in our youth group would bring. They would just bring these mammoth things that there is no way in the world that they could carry that stuff, you know. You would look at it and they say, "Can you help me? I can't carry this." I'm like, "You packed it, you carry it," you know, like. But we had helped them along the way and as much as we can. But I remember this one trip in particular. I think it was our first year going to Jamaica. And we had given the kids specific instructions. And one of the things was, if you have a suitcase, you couldn't have any more than 50 pounds in it. So we told all the students, we're like, listen, when you weigh it at home, try to keep it to 45 pounds. And then we know that we won't have any problems. All right, everybody agree with that. So we get in line. We put everything on the scale. This one girl brings her suitcase up that we picked up, and it was the heaviest thing that I ever felt. And I put it on there, and it was over 100 pounds. And I looked at the girl, and I'm like, "Hey, by any chance, did you weigh this thing before you came?" And she's like, "Yeah." She said, "It said 45 pounds. And I said, "I want your scale." 'Cause I'm like, I'm going to have immediate results tomorrow when I use your scale. So anyway, so we put this thing up there. And I have to tell you, it was the funniest thing because, girls are pretty worried about, you getting in their suitcase and stuff. But we had to unload some of the stuff, and some of us had to take on some of their stuff. So anyways, we started to unload it. Hopefully I can find where the zipper starts. Okay. The first service, I found the expansion pack, by the way, and not the actual zipper. So anyways, let me move this over here. So we opened up her suitcase. And at first, everything was cool because, we grabbed out some of her clothing, and I'm like, well, clothing doesn't weigh that much unless you decided to wet it down and then put it in or something. But they were dry, so we knew they were good with that. Started pulling out some of her other clothes. And again, we're going to Jamaica in the summer, and I pulled out 3 sweatshirts. And I'm like, what are 3 sweatshirts for? She's like, I don't know. Maybe I get cold at night. You know how I get. And I'm like, in Jamaica? I'm like, that place is blistering, you have no clue. So anyway, so we pulled some of that stuff out, and then we got to her shoe collection, and it was like shoe after shoe after shoe, and these are mine, not girly, hopefully. But anyways, she had like 10 pairs of shoes in this one bag. And again, I was like, this is insane. I was like, why all the shoes? She's like, well, you don't know if some things are formal or not. I'm like, we're on a missions trip. All right, we are not getting real formal in this stuff. So anyway, so we grabbed some of the other clothes, stayed away from the underwear type stuff, to her, I'm sure she was glad about that. But then we got into some of the mission stuff, and it was like gloves. And I was like, yeah, you need your gloves and stuff to work. And we were going to be leaving some of that stuff with them. And then we got into what I thought was probably some of the unnecessary stuff. And it was like, I'm just using this as an illustration. But it was like a ton of food that she had in this bag. So we started grabbing out like, granola bars, candy bars, suckers, and all this stuff. And I'm like, why so much food? And she's like, well, I didn't have any idea what we were going to eat over there, and I didn't want to starve to death. And I'm like, oh my goodness gracious. And then this one cracked me up because I literally pulled out this. And I'm like, that might be some of the extra weight right there, So we pulled out this big thing of water, and we started laughing, and we're like, well, what do you need? What was that for? And she was like, well, I don't think we're allowed to drink the water over there. And I'm like, well, they have bottled water. I think we can buy it there, and all of a sudden, she had all the toilet paper and all that stuff. So, we got that unpacked, and then I had to laugh, too, because then you get to their carry-on, which, man, if you've ever been traveling with a teen now with a carry-on, they have so many devices that, it is insane. So you get into their bags and you pull out the stuff and it's like, okay, here we go. This is all the wires that they're bringing with them, And I'm thinking, not only do they probably think you're making a bomb, I'm not so sure myself, we need to get rid of this stuff, stat, So anyway, so we unload all this kind of crazy stuff. And I'm always amazed, again, by how unnecessarily we pack sometimes. And I have to tell you again, I spoke about my wife, but I love my wife because she doesn't pack a ton at all. Like, we have 5 kids, and there's the 2 of us, and we have a little minivan that we drive around, and we'll go on like a week's vacation. And my wife, after she's done packing everybody, I put the luggage in the back, and I can still see out of the back window. And I think that is absolutely amazing. Now, guys, listen, she's already taken. I don't want you to be jealous, okay? But, it's just phenomenal. But because of the way she packs, I have to tell you, she's really lightened our load, Because some of the ways I used to pack, that stuff is heavy. And I wasn't joking. I actually did tweak my back the first service doing this. But that kind of weight to carry is just crazy. And it's hard on you. And yet there are so many of us who walk through this journey of life, who travel through it, and we've either had all this other stuff put on us by either ourselves or somebody else, and it is weighing us down in such a way that it is really hurting us. It is hurting us in our relationships, it's hurting us spiritually, it's just hurting us in general. So I love this story that we're going to look at today, because we're going to look at the story of Joseph. And we looked at this story several weeks ago, and we're going to be looking today from Genesis chapter 50, verses 15 through 21. Joseph was one of these guys who had every reason to be weighed down by the things of this world. There were things that were inflicted upon him that he had every right to sort of be weighed down and to give up. And yet at the end of the day, Joseph unloads all this stuff to God. And so I love what happens in this story, because there is a freedom and there is a lightening of the load that he has, in which he is able to carry on through life. So let's read this story together in Genesis chapter 50, starting with verse 15. It says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, and by the way, this happens after after Joseph goes through a lot of his situations in life, and he's been placed in a position where he can bring all his brothers and his father and take care of them. And now his father is dead. So it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? So they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left these instructions before he died. This is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of the God of your father. When their message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, don't be afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good, to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and then spoke kindly to them. So let's pray together. Father, I thank you for this word today. And I pray, Father, that all of us would be able to do an examination of our own lives. And say, here's some of the baggage that may have accompanied me along the way. Here are some of the stuff I've inflicted on myself. Here's maybe some of the things that people have inflicted on us. And we've allowed them to weigh us down. I pray today that we would have that same resolve that Joseph did. And we just said, I want to just turn this over to God. I want to lighten my load. And I want to recognize what someone is intended for evil, God is using for good. Father, I pray today that if there's any interpretations or anything that I would mess up in some way, I pray that you would speak it into the ears of your people so that the only voice they hear today is yours. In your name we pray. Amen. So I wanted to let you know early on that I want all of us to do a very deep examination of ourselves. Because I'm hoping by the end of this service, I want to do a time of an altar call where some of you may come up, some of you may stand, some of you may kneel. But I'm hoping at the end of this service that you may find something in your life that maybe you've never given over to the Lord as far as baggage, and then you might be able to do that. I have to brag on a church that I went to this week. I was invited by Ashley, a young lady in our church. And she said, hey, Pastor Chuck, she said, I'm going to be giving my testimony at Celebrate Recovery, which is being held at the First Church of the Nazarene on Thursday night. She said, would you be willing to come and hear my testimony? And I said, man, I'd love that. So anyway, so I went Thursday night. And I have to tell you, when I stepped into that place, I was so moved by what they were doing that I actually told the pastor afterwards, I said, this is probably the most important thing you guys will do all week. And the reason for that is when I went in this service, I began to see all these people, and some of them would be very down and out people. Like, you know, you could probably tell right away that they're probably strung out on something, you know. And just looked like they had probably not much to live for almost. But then what I was amazed at looking over that group and then seeing some of the business people in town that had prominent positions that I knew that were also there for the same stuff, and seeing all these people come together. And then they would come up at different times when they would be celebrating one thing or another. Some of them were celebrating that they had been drug-free for 30 days, some 60, some 90, some a year, some 8 years. And they would all just clap and rejoice and all that. And they would sing songs of praise to God. And then you would see the people that would just come up and say, this is my first day that I've been free. And again, everyone would just clap. I was just so amazed in that service, and I just got so choked up because I was like, man, this is the most authentic thing that I have ever seen. You can step into many a church on Sunday and know that people have a lot of baggage, and they'll never, ever come forward to confess like those individuals did that night. And then to hear the testimony of one of our own in there just floored me, and I wept and wept and wept the whole time, until I was able to give her a hug at the end and then wept some more. And I have to tell you, I'm hoping that someday we'll get her to share her story here as well. I said, you got to share this at church sometime. That was phenomenal. But church, I'm hoping that today that some of us would have that same resilience to be able to come forward and say, this is what I got, and this is what I need to unload. When you read the story of Judas, you'll know that there's a lot of baggage to go around. And even though we just read from chapter 50, this really starts back in chapter 37, which we'll go over in a little bit. But man, there's a lot of people that are really traveling heavy in this story. So first of all, you have the brothers' baggage. And if you look at chapter 37, what you'll see is there, you'll see that they were very jealous. And the reason why they were jealous is Joseph had told them about these dreams that he was having. And one of these dreams, he said, he's like, we were collecting all the sheaves, and as we were collecting the sheaves, you guys collected yours, and I collected mine. And he said, and when it was all done, my sheaves stood straight up, and yours began to bow down to me. And right away, they're like, what do you think? You think that we, your brothers, you, our little brother, are going to bow down to you at some point? And I don't know that he responded there, but it says that they grew with this jealousy. And by the way, this jealousy just didn't start there. You have to remember that Joseph's dad made him a certain coat that had all this unique stuff, very colorful, very bright, and a lot of expensive stuff poured into it. And the only one that he gave it to was Joseph. And the brothers were jealous of that as well. And so this had already been building up. And then Joseph, it's not like he just had one dream, but he comes with another one as well. And his father is standing there at this time, and he says, look, I had this dream about the sun and the moon and the 11 stars, and they were all bowing down to me. Now, again, they're getting jealous. The father can probably see this. And his father is thinking, man, Joseph, this is so absurd. What are you doing? You're just making these guys even more and more jealous. And he says, do you really think that your mother and I are going to bow down to you as well? And again, we don't have his response from it, but you can tell that this jealousy is building up. And even his dad recognizes that this is a problem at the time. Well, we know this jealousy built up so much, and if anyone's ever been jealous, you know what it turns into. It turns into some sort of anger. And so there's this night when they're out sort of in the fields, and Joseph's daddy said, hey, look, I want you to go take some rations to your brothers, and I want you to feed them while they're in the field over the flocks. And so the brothers are there, and they're minding their business, and all of a sudden they see Joseph coming in a distance. And you have to remember, their jealousy has turned to anger. And in their anger, they began to plot against him. They began to talk among themselves like, man, Joseph, he drives us crazy. I'm so tired of hearing about Joseph. I'm so tired of him getting the coat. I'm so tired of hearing about his dreams. They said, why don't we just go ahead and kill him? And then we'll be done with him. And then we'll tell our dad that he was taken by some vicious animals. That's what we'll tell him. And their anger built in such a way that that's what they plotted to do. So one of the brothers said, man, look, guys, let's not kill him. Let's think about another way. So they threw him in a cistern, and they began to plot about his death or his demise. And then what happened is they got a little better idea, and I believe that this is more sabotage when you think about it. But they decided instead of killing the brother, let's make some money off of him. And what they did is they had taken his life that had value and purpose, and they sabotaged it, and they made him worthless. And that you're nothing more than a slave to us, and we're willing to trade you off. We're willing to get money for it. And so it says they got to the Midianites, and they sold their brother into the slavery. Now, in order to pull this thing off, they knew that they eventually were going to have to tell their dad. So they took that coat of many colors, and they ripped it off of him. And they ripped it up into some pieces. And they took a goat, and they cut it up. And they took the blood of the goat, and they put it all over that garment. And I can't even imagine this, but they went up to their brother, their father, so full of jealousy and anger and all this turmoil in their lives that they took that coat to their dad. And they knew exactly whose coat it was. I mean, there was no doubt whose coat this was. And they took it to their father, and they said, hey, Dad, do you recognize this? Do you recognize this? Lying to their dad all the time that they had just found this in a field somewhere. And I can't even imagine, because all this baggage that they're traveling with the jealousy. They're traveling with the baggage of anger, the baggage of sabotage, and now the lies that they were telling. I can't imagine the weight of guilt that they had to be feeling when their father rips his clothes in front of them and says, this is my son's. And he's been attacked by vicious animals. And this is all I have of him. And his dad literally said, I will go with this pain to the grave. Now, I don't know if you've ever been like in a guilt situation, but I'm thinking at some point I would have been like, you know what, Dad? We were just lying to you. Like, we need to go get our brother. But instead, they just let their dad sit in that misery and that torment for the rest of his life. Then you have the baggage of Joseph himself. And we read in Genesis 37 and 39 what happens. And again, I believe some of the baggage initially is just pride, just this arrogance about himself. I mean, he's sitting there like he has this dream, and he actually already knows sort of what the interpretation of the dream was. And then he goes and tells everybody, and everybody else gets the idea too. And he's like, yeah, I think you're going to bow down to me. And not only does he do it once, but you kind of know when your brothers are a little bit upset with you. But he thinks, I'll poke them again. I had another dream, guys, and this happened. So there would be this pride and arrogance that would have built up in him. And I bet that when Joseph was in that cistern, or I bet when he was in prison, or I bet when he was in any captivity, I bet the baggage of pride hit him and said, I wish I wouldn't have said that. I wish I wouldn't have lived that way. And that baggage of pride was with him. Secondly, I believe he had a baggage of abandonment as well. His brothers had left him in a pit, and they began to talk about what they were going to do with him, and how they were going to sell him or how they were going to kill him. And he had to hear all these thoughts, and they didn't care anything about him. They just left him in that pit, and then eventually they sold him, and they abandoned him as their brother. And I would even suspect that he probably felt like at some point he was abandoned by his father as well. Because even though he heard the story, he probably thought in his mind, Dad, why didn't you come out and see the place where they found me? Why didn't you make sure that everything happened exactly the way they said? Just because they gave you a coat, like you believed it? Like, Dad, why didn't you come after me when I needed you the most? And there would have been that feeling of loss, sort of been that feeling of abandonment as well, that baggage that would have just weighed him down. And then he was sold and he was enslaved. And he wasn't sold just once. He was sold twice. He was sold first to the Midianites who took him on a journey. And then he was sold again to Potiphar. And all the while he had to be a slave. He was treated as nothing. Now you're just a commodity for us. Something that we can make money off of. And we can work you to whatever we want. Now I'm sure there must have been that baggage that would have been with him as well. Well, he's in Potiphar's house and has kind of a good situation going on. He gets to be in charge of a lot of the things that are going on in Potiphar's house. And Potiphar was real close to the Pharaoh himself, so this is sort of a good situation. He was doing all the right things, but Potiphar's wife took a liking to Joseph. And she began to see herself with him and began to lust after him. And she began to say to him, hey, why don't you come sleep with me? And Joseph's response was like, no, I can never do that to my master. I'm above all that. Do you see what he has given me? Did you see what he's entrusted me to? Why would I ever think about doing that to my master? And day after day, she came up to him. Until eventually she got him to sit down on his bed. She grabbed him by his cloak. And she said, again, sleep with me. And he took off running, and his coat was left there. Well, Potiphar's wife decided that she didn't like the treatment that Joseph had given her. So she went to her husband Potiphar, and she said, that boy that you hired, he tried to come into my room and take advantage of me. And I have his cloak to prove it. And Joseph was accused for something he didn't do. It was something he couldn't control. And because of that, he was convicted, and again, he was imprisoned. All for something he never did. Can you imagine the weight of all those experiences on you? The pride thing is mine. But the other stuff just keeps being brought on me. Now, many of us know the end of the story. Joseph eventually interprets a dream for the Pharaoh out of that prison. He's put in charge of things in prison. He interprets some dreams for the guys in there. Then he interprets Pharaoh's dream. And then he gets in charge of sort of making sure that the community was taken care of. So that when the droughts came, they would all be taken care of. So Joseph had a pretty prime position. But up to this point, there's a lot of weight in what he's experiencing. Now, this isn't in your notes, but this morning, as I was going through the story again, it's just interesting sometimes that God just gives you sort of another thought. And I thought to myself, what about the father's baggage? What was he feeling in that moment? You see, he realized that his son had been viciously attacked, he thought, by an animal. You think in his mind he might have been saying, why did I ever send him there alone? Why would I let this young boy, why didn't I go with him? Or why didn't I send some other people with him to protect him in some way? Or maybe, what if I would have trained him harder? What if I would have taught him how to defend himself so that when those vicious animals came, he could have defended himself and he could have taken care of that? I think the thoughts would have been going on and on and on in his head. And he would have felt the guilt and the weight of that as well. And that would have been the father's baggage to add to the story. And so what's my baggage? Maybe you can identify with the brothers. Maybe there have been things that you've done and you're not proud of. Maybe you've lied to someone. Maybe you've cheated someone. Maybe you've struggled with addictions that you brought upon yourself. Maybe you sabotaged somebody else's life. Maybe you stole from them. Or you gossiped about them. Or you tried to put them down because you were jealous of what they were getting. Maybe it was a coworker. Maybe it was somebody else on a team. Maybe it was somebody in your family that you despised. Maybe for some of you, it's the self-inflicted stuff is I just got too much stuff maxed out on my credit cards. And it's a baggage that just on me now. And I don't know how to get out of this. I don't know how to get out of this debt. Maybe something in some way that you sort of sabotaged yourself. Or maybe you're like Joseph. And maybe you've had times where you've just been too prideful. Maybe you've looked at everyone else around you and said, I know I'm better than them. I know that I'm getting that job promotion, or I know I'm going to get that award, or I know I'm going to get that bonus because I've put way too much in and I've done everything better than anyone else and I deserve this very thing. And then you get passed by. You get no promotion. you get no bonus, and you get no recognition. And in your pride, you act out. Maybe there have been some things that were inflicted on you. Maybe you got cut from a team early on in life and just felt worthless. Maybe you had a coach or a teacher or a parent or a friend who said something completely negative about you that would suggest that you won't amount to much. And maybe that still stirs in you each and every day. Maybe that's something that's just weighing you down. Maybe you were taken advantage of financially. Maybe you were embarrassed in some way that you could just never get past it. Maybe you were taken advantage of emotionally or even physically. You could have been physically abused. You could have been sexually abused. And you carry the weight of that with you. And I know those stories exist because I've had those conversations with many of you. And I know where you're coming from. And even though I haven't experienced that sort of pain that you feel like, man, I just can't even imagine what it would be like to go through that very thing. So maybe you're like Joseph. Or maybe you've been the father. Maybe there's been a child that you've prayed for day after day after day. And for whatever reason, they choose a different lifestyle than what you brought them up to consider. Maybe they've given themselves over to some addiction, and you've been praying for them day over day that they would overcome that very thing. And for whatever reason, they haven't overcome that. Maybe you've prayed for their soul. Maybe they've never asked Christ in their life, and you can't imagine being in heaven without them. And so you're constantly praying that they'll make a decision for Christ, or that Christ would intervene in such a real way in their life that you would know for a fact that he was there. Maybe you've been the father in that situation. See, not is there only that sort of baggage that we have in life, but there's also what we call sometimes like a generational baggage. And Exodus 20:4-6 says this, and this is God talking before the Ten Commandments, and he says, you shall not, or during the Ten Commandments, he says, you shall not make for yourself an image in the form of anything in heaven above or the earth beneath or in the waters below. You shall not bow down to them or worship them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, punishing the children for the sin of the parents to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing love to 1,000 generations to those who love me and keep my commandments. And we read that passage and we recognize that this is about, like, we shouldn't create any images other than God. But there are some things that we've placed in very high value in this life over God. And we've decided, maybe we don't think about bowing down to them, but our life is moved in such a way that these things have become way more important than what God has become. And because of it, we experience generational sort of baggage that comes along. And you read these stories of generational baggage, and it's interesting because I just want to share a couple of things sort of through the story of, if you've read the Old Testament through. But one thing is, there's this general baggage of lies that have been passed down from one generation to the other. We read Abraham early on lied twice about Sarah and her age and who she was. Isaac and Rebekah's marriage was characterized by lies, passing it to the next generation. Jacob lied to almost everyone. He's the father. He lied to almost everyone, and his name literally means deceiver. And then you have the 10 children of Jacob who lie about their brother's death. They fake a funeral, and they keep that secret for almost 10 years. There's sibling rivalry that's passed down from one generation to the next. You look at Abraham's and the way he is committed to Isaac and Ishmael. And yet they were cut off from one another. They couldn't be around each other because the moms couldn't get along. So there was a separation in their family. That was passed down to Jacob, who fled his brother Esau and was completely cut off for him for years because he took his brother's birthright. And then you had Joseph, who was cut off for almost 10 years from his brothers, for a decade, because of their jealousy and anger. There's favoritism that's passed down from one generation to the next. Abraham favored both Ishmael and Isaac at different times. Ishmael, it says that even though he had him leave, there were a couple times that he came to visit him because he just couldn't believe what they were asking him to do for his son. And then later, God says, how much do you love me, Abraham? Are you willing to give your son up for me? There's favoritism. And that favoritism is passed down then to Isaac, who favored Esau. And Rebekah favored Jacob. And then we read later that Jacob favored both Joseph and later Benjamin. And that favoritism is passed down from one generation to the next because that's what they see. And then there's the whole point of the unhealthy marriage that you see as well. Abraham had a child out of wedlock with Hagar. Isaac had a terrible relationship with Rebekah. Jacob had 2 wives and 2 concubines as well. The unhealthy marriage was passed down from one generation to the next. And if you don't understand that, I've even looked today into some of our own history. And there's some statistics that I read recently that I believe are generational baggage that we pass down. These statistics may vary, but one study by researchers indicated that if a woman's parents are divorced, her odds of divorce increase 69%. Now, you get this. Well, if both a husband and wife's parents are divorced, the risk of divorce increases by 189%. Children of addicts are 8 times more likely to develop an addiction themselves. A 1985 study shows that the sons of alcoholic fathers are 4 times more likely to become alcoholics themselves. The rate of abuse among individuals with a history of abuse is approximately 6 times higher than the base rate for abuse in the general population. Now, here's some interesting statistics as well. 2/3 of Christians come to faith before the age of 18. 43% came to Christ before the age of 12. You think children's ministries are important? Less than 1/4 of current believers came to Christ after the age of 21. That's why it's important to have your kids here at church. According to data collected by Promise Keepers and Baptist Press, if a father does not go to church, even if the wife does, only 1 child in 50 will become a regular worshiper when they get older. If a father does go regularly, regardless of what the mother does, between 2/3 and 3/4 of their children will attend church as adults. Man, you think there's a reason to be here at church? Fathers? We have a part to play in that. What do you want to pass down from one generation to the next? And I can't even begin to imagine what's going on in your own situation and where you might say, you know what, I think this was passed down from one generation to the other. There's things in my family that I know that were passed down from me. In marriage counseling now, one of the whole things we do is one study just on what does your family bring to the table that you might be bringing into your marriage. And we discuss those things, and it's very interesting to say what happens. There's some good, and there's some bad that we bring in, and we try to work with that. I don't have time to do this today, too, but I also believe, and this is one of the things I probably would have added, I also believe that there is also baggage that the church brings in as well. And I don't want to put all churches down and stuff. I hope you know that. Because the church is the primary place that God is still working to use to bring people to Christ. It's still one of the main things. I don't want to put that down. But there is some baggage that we have inflicted on people around us. And there's probably some baggage that I've inflicted on people as well. So, how do you carry this load, or how did they carry the load? The brothers continued to be weighed down. And so you see again in verse 15, it says, when Joseph's brothers saw that their father was dead, they said, what if Joseph holds a grudge against us and pays us back for all the wrongs we did to him? You got to remember, in this story, man, Joseph had already forgiven his brothers, and he had fed them, he had taken them in, but in their mind and in their guilt and in the stuff that had weighed them down, they're like, there is no way that Joseph is going to continue to forgive us, because the only buffer that we had was Dad, and he's gone. And so they once again got weighed down by this burden of their own guilt. So in verse 16 it says, so they sent word to Joseph saying, your father left us these instructions before he died. And you see they're lying still? They continue in on this. They can't even understand the grace and the love that Joseph has shown them. And so this is what you are to say to Joseph. I ask you to forgive your brothers the sins and the wrongs they committed in treating you so badly. Now please forgive the sins of the servants of God, your father. They could not understand the grace and love that Joseph had shown them. And when Joseph heard this, it said that he wept. Now, church, there is a God who has forgiven you. There is a God who wants to take your baggage on. There is a God who says, I can't believe that you don't know how much my love is for you, that I could forgive you. And yet there are times that we still feel like we need to barter with God, forgetting that he's all-knowing and that he knows exactly what we're thinking and what we're processing. Joseph, instead of carrying the weight of this load like his brothers did, instead of allowing it to weigh him down more and more, Joseph just lightened the load. He said when he heard this message came to him, Joseph wept. His brothers then came and threw themselves down before him. We are your slaves, they said. But Joseph said to them, guys, quit being afraid. Am I in the place of God? You intended to harm me. True. But God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. So then don't be afraid. I will provide for you and your children. And he reassured them and spoke kindly to them. That amount of grace and that amount of love that he's shown right there is the same grace and love that God wants to show you. Joseph could have been continually weighed down by that, but he unloaded it and said, look, even though this could have been a bad situation, God's taken it and created it for good. So how do you carry your load? Matthew 11:29-30, Jesus speaking says this, take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. I've seen many people come through with a lot of baggage. And when they're able to turn it over to Jesus, and when they're able to lay it at the foot of the cross, the weight of that is no more. They don't have to physically carry that anymore. And they're a little bit lighter on their step. I've seen that happen to people in the church. I was meeting with Dean Ebert this week, and man, if you know his story and where he came from, he was in a situation where his, I don't know if his dad, grandpa, whatever, but there was just alcoholism big time in his family. Have to sit in bars for hours. And he decided at one point in his life, I'm giving my heart to Jesus, and I will not be like that. He lightened his load. And because of that, he's a great person in the church. He's a great person in his community. He's even a better person in his family. And he decided to break that cycle. Ashley, if we ever get her to tell her story about addiction and some of the things that she went through to care for those addictions. She lost her children in the process. She unloaded that to Jesus. And now she's got her children back. Now she's in a better place. And she's got a job where she's taking care of herself and her kids. Absolutely amazing. So my question is to you today, because I don't know what that baggage is. I don't know what my own baggage is. I know the things that I have had to struggle through. But what's your baggage this morning? What baggage do you need to unload on Jesus to lighten your load? Church, would you stand with me this morning? I told you I wanted to give an invitation this morning. And I really believe this. I believe there's a whole lot of us, if we went and told our stories and about our hurts and our struggles, I bet there's just a ton of baggage that none of us even know about, but you've just been carrying that on. Hey, this morning, if you just want to come forward and you can stand in front of the altar, you can kneel in front of the altar, and you just say, Lord, may it just be symbolism. Lord, today I want to unload this right here at the foot. In front of all these people, I just want to unload it. If that's you this morning, I want to invite you to come forward right now. You can stand there, you can pray by yourself, we can pray with you, whatever that is. But if there's anybody right now that just wants to come and do that, just go ahead and come now and unload that to Christ. Maybe you've been hurt this morning. Maybe you've been taken advantage of and it's just something you need to give over. Would you come? Maybe you've been lied to. You haven't been appreciated. Someone said a negative word about you long ago or maybe just recently and you just cannot get it out of your head. And you say this morning, I just need to give this up right now. Why don't you come? I know for some of you, probably coming up this morning is probably a difficult thing to do. So if there's still more of you that want to come, just please do that. And we'll pray with you. If you want to pray by yourself, that's fine. This is really between you and the Lord anyways. But I'd ask you to just close your eyes for a moment. And if there are anyone that would say, Pastor Chuck, I do have some baggage. I'm just, the idea of coming forward is just more than I can do right now. And you just say, could you just please pray for me? Would you just raise your hands this morning? I just want to remember your prayers. Got it right here, man. There's a lot of them all over this congregation. Yes, I see all those hands. And just put those hands down. Thank you, thank you. I see those hands. Thank you. Thank you, thank you. See it right there in the middle and the back. Thank you. See it. Thank you. Church, we're going to pray together. And then once I dismiss, if you could just leave sort of reverently, and we can still pray with some of these that are at the altar right now. We want to do that. Let's pray together. Father, I thank you for being present in this place today and helping us to sort of search our hearts and our lives and to see the baggage or the junk that maybe we inflicted upon ourselves, maybe it was inflicted by somebody else, or maybe we're just carrying the baggage for other family members. I just pray that as we unload that today, I pray that we would get up feeling a little bit lighter, recognizing that we have a God who completely loves us, and what he did on the cross was more than enough to cover all this stuff. Help us not to become in a position where we try to barter or bargain with you, but help us to recognize that we have been freely forgiven. We have been freely changed. And we can go out and make a difference in the world with our own stories. What the enemy intended for bad, you said, I'm going to do something good with that. So help us recognize how we get the good out of it. Father, I thank you for these people. I thank you for decisions that have been made today. May we leave this place of people knowing that we are loved by you. In your name we pray. Amen. Hey, church, thanks for being with us today. We'll see you again next week.
Once again, thanks for listening. If you are in the Marion area, we would love to engage with you at one of our Sunday morning gatherings. For directions, service times, and information about our fantastic children and student ministries, visit us at dayspringwesleyan.org. That's dayspringwesleyan.org.